All right. What's up, everybody? I am ready to go. We are finally picking up where we left off with the discussion between Mike Huemer and Emerson Green on the topic of moral realism. What else? All right, so let's start giving out the Lance Loot. We've got Mason Colbert in first for 1,000 Lance Loot. Mike, you were a bit early, so if you want that Lance Loot, you got to wait until like I'm on the screen, I guess, or after the intro video. I don't know what the official. I don't know what the official rules are, as if they're stance independent rules. I make up the rules, so it's when I decide. So, Mike, you're going to get 200 Lance Loot because I can do that. I have the authority. It's stance dependent. This is a Lance command theory that we're going with here. But Mason, you get 1,000. Clash in the third, you get 500 Lance Loot, and then Ben Singleton, you get 250. All right. David says first. That's not how it works. You actually have to be first, but I like the enthusiasm, so I'll give you 100 Lance Loot. Everyone, it's been a couple weeks since I did one of these, right? You know, I have the TikTok stuff from last year. I should try to do a few more of those, right? Whatever happened with the whole thing that we're going to shut down TikTok? That never happened. Cool. All right. But I haven't done any more of those. So the past couple weeks I've been busy. I did do a couple streams over the past few days. We did a stream. Oh, can I even remember? Oh, right. I did a stream with Nathan where, what were we looking at? I can't even remember what we were doing. What were we doing? I have to check what I was doing like 2 days ago. Oh my gosh. Okay. What was I doing? I don't even know. Oh, wow. Oh, right. We just talked about a whole bunch of random stuff. So we talked about Danny on Jubilee with his conversation with Jordan Peterson. It sounds weird to say that, right? Like as if it's not normal to speak to Jordan Peterson. All right, what does Faith have to say here? But how do you account for the authority of that God? Yeah. Yeah, it's one thing about theistic morality is that at least God can like back it up, you know? So secular moral realism, you could just go about your business and like there's moral rules, and if you ignore them, nothing happens. But if there's like a supernatural being that is all powerful and they know exactly what you're doing and they're like, hey, don't do that or else, and there's actually an else, at least God can bring down the hammer. If not figuratively, then like literally, God could literally just go get you with a hammer, like, you know, Mario, like Papa Turtles, just bam, you know. What's the thing with the hammer? I don't know where, or like whatever. Anyway, I don't know what I'm talking about. For some reason, I had that paper that went around the internet in my mind about Super Mario and like crushing turtles or something. I don't know if you've seen that. It's like this joke paper. It looks like it might be fake, but maybe someone turned that in for real. I don't know if you've seen it before, but it's really funny. Okay, so what? Oh, right. So we talked about Jordan. I'm confusing myself. My God. Just wait for like a year or two from now with the streams, and then I have a baby, and then I'm dealing with all this like other stuff, and I'll be so discombobulated and confused. I'll just get on here and I won't even know what I'm talking about. I'll go in a 12-minute rant about kiwis or something. I probably could pull that off. I actually, yeah, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Okay. So what do we talk about? Jordan Peterson and I have to do this for myself. I have to like re-up the memories to make sure the files are still there. Otherwise, we got problems. All right. Jordan Peterson and Danny. Intuitions, and then Alex Malpass showed up, and that was cool. Oh, and we were criticizing Bentham's Bulldog. So the blog is Bentham's newsletter, and then he writes under the name Bentham's Bulldog. But then he has his own name, and then he has like a different name on YouTube. It's very confusing. Go for the uniform branding. That's what I did. So that's my recommendation to Bentham's Bulldog is get the branding consistent. So I would maybe change the newsletter to Bentham's Bulldog, and then change the YouTube to Bentham's Bulldog. I mean, I know that I criticize you a lot, but I think this is good advice. I don't know, like to keep the consistent thing instead of having a different name everywhere. I don't know. And then Alex Malpass showed up and we talked a bit about intuitions. And then yesterday We had Nathan again. It's just been this like Nathan thing lately, and Pete Mandic. And then I just wasn't feeling well. I'm still feeling a little bit off. I don't know what the issue is. And then I just checked out most of the conversation, so I wasn't there. Fortunately, I got to listen to Nathan and Pete have a really good conversation. They've continued a little bit of the back and forth over on Substack. If you're not on Substack because you're like my YouTube crew, um, you got to get over there. It's really blowing up over there. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of like if you're into like good philosophical conversations, there's a lot of them happening over there. So go check that out. I see a lot of stuff in the chat. It looks like mostly David, who I don't know if I can mention what's going on with you in your life. So I don't know if that's private stuff. I don't know if it's like friends only stuff or not. So let me know. You know what I'm talking about. So define account. Yeah, I mean, everybody is kind of making fun of Jordan Peterson. I honestly hope it's like because like he got just blasted and like mega roasted in that interaction. I hope he's like okay. Because that's got to be emotionally rough for someone to handle. What is David talking about? I have a feeling what Lance just mentioned is the real intuition lying behind moral arguments for theism once you strip away the philosophical. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like God can actually hold people accountable. And people say it's you can't have a law without a lawgiver. Now, there's a sense in which I don't think that that's true because you could just, it depends on your conception of a law, but you can't have an enforceable law without some means of enforcement. That doesn't require a God, though. There could be like karma. It could be, like what if you committed 12 wrongs, the lightning bolt hit you, but it wasn't facilitated by an agent. That'd be weird, but it seems possible. Like if the universe just, I mean, what would be weird about it is that it would seem like purposeful and rule-like, but that wouldn't be any different than any other law. Like it's not like like you could say gravity is intending to push you down. So it could just be like that. So you don't need gods to enforce rules, but it seems like a natural thought to people. I don't know. But I don't think it gets you any closer to realism. That's the thing. Clashman III says, Lance loot is illegitimate currency without the non-natural property of stance-independent monetary value. Yeah, I mean, that's one of those funny things. Like money works. We could just make up that, and that's got value. So clearly people can create value, assign value. I don't think realists typically deny that anyway, but like we can do that. And, this is a thing to note about that. Look at how well money functions despite being socially constructed by us. So, it's not like think about it. The fact that money has value is in fact stance dependent. It's not stance independent. It's not like if aliens showed up on Earth and we all died 10,000 years ago, that they would show up and they'd find $5 bills and go, oh shit, this is worth $5. Like we have to treat it accordingly. It would be an artifact. You'd put it in a museum. Maybe it'd be worth more than $5 because it'd go in their intergalactic museum and it'd be worth more, in whatever alien museum there is. But the point would be the value that money has is something that we mutually agree on. It's a socially constructed type of value. But what you don't see, because notice what realists always say, if you're an anti-realist, is they're like, well, why would anyone take your claim seriously? Why would anyone enforce the norms? Well, why would they care? Why we care about money? No one just imagine going into a store and it says $10 for something, or and you go up to buy it and they're like, nah, it's 20. Why would I care about just $10? I could charge whatever I want. I decided the exchange rate for your money and my money is it's 2 times in favor of me. Ha. I could just no one does that because there are social ramifications for violating the norms that people mutually agree on. And so if we as a society enforce rules like, hey, you can't just go in and steal things, or you can't just hit people because you feel like it, that is what does the enforcing. The fact that there are consequences, or at least potential consequences, to you doing something that's wrong. If you went around and acted weird about money, people just wouldn't take you seriously. So the typical way in which a norm is enforced isn't by other people going, oh, it's true independent of whether I or anyone else cares about it. Well, I didn't realize that. I guess I'll comply. No, it's enforced in virtue of people caring. So even if there were stance independent moral facts or whatever other type of normative fact that you could think of, the only way in which they would ever impinge on and manifest as consequences anyone would be responsive to is to the extent, and only to the extent, that anyone cared to be responsive to them. If we as a society, if we let's say we got that thing from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and it spat out. We like ask it, what are all the stance independent moral facts, and it spat out a list of rules, and we all were like, yeah, we don't like those, and we ignored them. There would be no change to our lives. Nothing would ever happen. And other kinds of facts just aren't really like that. So if you just decided to ignore the periodic table and try to do chemistry, it wouldn't work. If you just decided to ignore gravity, good luck. Good luck with that. It's not going to work very well. So the moral facts are a weird kind of fact because they're a kind of fact that you could ignore. And in virtue of you and everyone else surrounding you ignoring them, there would never be any perceivable consequences they would ever have on anybody, ever. They could never impact anything. And that's a weird kind of fact, a fact where its impact is only contingent on the extent to which you believe it. You know what that's pretty similar to? The Easter Bunny. Like, if you believe the Easter Bunny is going to do stuff, that could modify your behavior. Or Santa Claus, right? So if you think Santa Claus is not going to give you presents if you're like bad, then it might modify your behavior. But it wouldn't have to be Santa Claus doing the work. It could just be your belief that's doing all the work. And I think it's the same thing with moral realism. I think that to the extent that moral realism has any consequences, I mean, it's not really moral realism having the consequences. It's a belief in moral realism. And it has every bit as much the kinds of consequences that totally like false beliefs would have, or completely belief in fictional entities would have. It's funny. It's a very peculiar thing that it functions exactly like, false beliefs or fictions. That's kind of funny. Okay. What else we got here? David says, congrats on the baby. Yep. I mean, I don't, thanks. And Faith says, Malpass is the man. It's interesting. Malpass joined for that conversation. We gotta set up a conversation if he's up for it. That'd be cool to talk about. I don't know, whatever, moral realism or whatever he's up for talking about. Clashman says the Mario paper is fake, but it's very funny. The writer has a couple other fake papers. Cool. Okay. I mean, it's a little sad that it's fake. I don't know what I would do if a student turned a paper in like that. I mean, I would laugh first of all because it's funny, but then I'd probably have to have a conversation with him. All right. Okay, so David is getting married. It's I see the posts and it's very cute. It's going to be great. You're going to have a great time. So many people turn. I don't know what kind of wedding you have planned, but so many people turn them into this big stressful thing. And with my wedding, I didn't do that. We had a good time, and it's funny. We were so busy and stressed and running around that I have very foggy memories of it. I do remember at one point we were doing photos and the organizer was asking me like what I wanted to drink. And I think he meant like, what kind of champagne do you want to hold for the photos? And I was like, I really need a coffee. And he was all flustered because he's like, no, that's not what I meant. And I was like, okay, but I do need a coffee. And so someone got me a coffee somewhere. So that was cool. Like someone just got me a coffee. That's not normally like, you don't normally go through life unless I guess you're a billionaire or something, and then I wouldn't want to take advantage of that. But you don't normally go through life saying, I want this, and then someone comes out and brings it to you. It was fun to do that once. So yeah, it was fun. And I hope, David, that you have a lot of fun with your wedding. All right. Ben Singleton shouting out Substack says Substack is the best. The level of discourse is good. I got more congrats over there, and congrats to David. It says, I'll read it. Why not? He put it here. He said, I'm marrying a smoking hot Latina. Why would I keep this a secret? So my wife is also Latina. So there you go. Okay. Singleton said, Peterson and Eric Weinstein have had a bad time lately. I gotta look into the Weinstein one a bit more to see what really went on there. Okay. Got somebody saying they hope my evening's going well. It's going all right. Going all right. All right. No, telling you Santa isn't really ruining my life. That's one decision. We're not telling our daughter that like Santa is real. I'm not going to do that. I'm intending if these things come up to present them as like fun stories, but do people need to think Santa's real? Like, does that add a lot to it? I don't know, because I was into like fantastical stuff, and I knew that the things weren't real. Like, it's not like if I went through a Dr. Seuss book. I always liked the Dr. Seuss stuff. I didn't think like the stuff at like Thing One and Thing Two were like a real, and I could go find them somewhere. I don't think I would have been too impressed if I saw people dressed like Thing One and Thing Two in like a suit running around. I don't know if that was ever my thing. I don't know. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's not my thing. Nidhi says, set up channel memberships so we can have pineapple pizza and intestine emojis. Do people have to pay for those? How does that? I don't know how that works. That's not an option already. I don't know how that works. So, Nidhi, if you want to get in touch with me and tell me more about how to do that, I'd be happy to do that. I don't know about that. All right. Yeah, Nidhi says, yep, we didn't tell him Santa was real either. Don't build lies in your child's relationship with you. Thumbs up. Yeah. Okay, so should we get into the video, or should I just keep talking about whatever I feel like? I did notice that I got onto the stream and I'm feeling much more comfortable than I was. Like, if you look at them like what was it, a year or two ago, it was a lot more awkward. And I guess if you just do this a whole lot, you do get used to it. I remember I would get so stressed before I started, and I would screw them up and I'd be all awkward, and I would delete some of them and restart them. I have had to do that a few more times, but that's usually for technical stuff because there's something stupid that happens with my camera or the microphone or something. But in the past, I would be like, I don't like the way this is going. Like, the camera goes on and I'm like, hey everybody, how's yous doing, or something. Like, I just screw up the language. And what's a better way of it sounding stupid? How you doing? Dao you hooing? I don't know. Like, you flip the letters, whatever it would be. I'd do something stupid, and then I would hate it, and then I would hate that every single person that watched the video later would put it on, and I'm like, Dao you hooing, and then they're just like, what? This is. I mean, it's not like I've improved the video. Like, I need to get a new camera. I eventually got the mic and the mic stand. Thanks to the person that sent me the money to get that. So I eventually got some better stuff, but this is still a hilariously low budget affair. And also I just suck at setting things up. I didn't set up the bookshelf by it. Still just got junk that I haven't organized yet. I didn't put the plant back. I've got a poster I haven't put up for 5 months, 6 months. How long has it been? It's been a long time. So yeah, I'm bad at getting stuff done. It's not good. All right. Okay, let's get into the video. We were about an hour in and it's 2 hours. So I'm on part 4 and we're only 1 hour in. Let's see where we get today. Okay.
Studying value. And so then you're like, oh, okay, well, all good things, all good fields of study have to be like science, and the scientists are not studying value. So let's just reject values. And then we're going to feel like we're, we're worshiping science effectively, or something. Like, we're showing our respect for science by just rejecting everything that isn't science, right? Like, that's what's really going on, but that's a totally non-scientific way of thinking. Like, that's an ideological way of thinking.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a whole other conversation, and I haven't found a way of talking about this where I don't, I hesitate to even bring it up, but I agree there is this kind of ideological overtone to some of the way the way that some of these people think is clearly ideological and clearly a product of the time they live in, and they just don't seem to be aware of that, or they are aware of it but they're fine with it because they're like, well, we're at the most advanced stage of human history in terms of knowledge about how the world works. So of course I just adopt, the way that the best method we have for figuring out the way the world works is science. So yeah, obviously I'm going to bet on science every single time. But yeah, it's a deeper conversation that I think it's this is just a weird period of history where people are adopting all kinds of insane beliefs that, just we look back at people 500 years ago, how the hell did they believe this weird stuff? And it is vaguely connected to religion, that sort of epistemic paradigm that they were operating on, and we're operating on a different one, but we accept these beliefs that I think are, or at least there are these, we don't all accept these beliefs, but there are some very strange forms of irrationality that I think are specifically a product of this time and this culture, and the valuing of science above all else, I feel is a pretty key component of that.
Yeah, that's right. You know, like
He might not be wrong about this, but does Emerson or does Huemer think that they are any less subject to certain sorts of ideological biases? I mean, it would be difficult to do the empirical work to find out who, if anyone, is more biased. I certainly have seen a kind of naive, almost comical science worship among people. So I don't think Emerson is misdiagnosing what he's described here, but I don't think that the solution to that is to, you know, dig back into old ideas that stem from the history of Western thought and see those as somehow the solution if one's motivation for finding those so appealing is itself potentially the product of various sorts of biases. And it would be difficult to know if that's the case. It could be that contemporary thought is frequently caught up in this scientific veil that is obscuring their ability to see reality for how it is, and that Emerson and Huemer, they can see past that, and they could look into the past history of thought, and they could sort through that, and they could pick out the ideas that are better and select them on the basis of their philosophical merit, and not on the basis of their concordance with some disposition that they themselves have that is rooted in some bias, some sort of potential dissatisfaction with the contemporary landscape. And that dissatisfaction could be rooted in, some sense of a concern for nihilism or loss of value or something like that. I mean, this is just completely, I'm not endorsing any of this. This is just completely speculative armchair psychology. But the point here is just that if one wanted, one could speculate on the psychological proclivities of Emerson and Huemer, and likewise tell a just so story about the motivations that they have for endorsing the views that they've ended up endorsing, that could be equally steeped in the epistemic vice of accusations of bias. And I don't think that would be especially productive. And I don't really want to do this like, well, this applies both ways kind of thing. But you know what? Yeah, I kind of do a little bit. But I'm not that drawn to this just because I don't think he's wrong in having concerns about people being too hyped up on science and this obscuring their ability to do philosophy well and think clearly about things. You know, you will frequently see me dissing analytic philosophy and criticizing analytic philosophy. Uh, but what I criticize are subsets of it and what I take to be excesses and dogmas that are common in the field. What I don't think is this goofy thing that you'll sometimes see from, physicists or biologists or whatever, that think that they're going to suddenly turn around and solve all the problems of philosophy without engaging with it. I think that that's highly misguided and naive and silly on their parts, and they almost invariably do quite a bad job. And so you do get people that seem to think that you can just like subsume philosophy with just pure science. And then what they end up doing is just making a bunch of philosophical claims as if they're not doing philosophy, but then they just end up being ignorant and uninformed and sloppy and poor on the distinctions and weak on their argumentation. And you do get this like basically bad scientism. And it is a problem, and it is worth diagnosing the problem, and it is worth criticizing the problem. So don't want to be too critical here. I agree with them about this. But, I do think that a lot of these problems we're approaching them with a sense that the solutions that we bring to the table are somehow free. It's like, hey, look, I'm not a victim of the contemporary zeitgeist, so I'm thinking around it. Yeah, but take a fundamentalist Christian. They could see the world changing around them, and they could look at all these changes and think, scientism is bad. I'm seeing past all that, and yet they're just rooted in a kind of localized bias that is every bit as much, if not more, rooted in an epistemic framework that is deeply flawed. So I think that the intuitionistic approach that Emerson and Huemer take I think that approach is very flawed. I do think it's steeped in various types of traditions, and I don't think it works any better than science. I certainly don't think that there should be a philosophy ignorant brand of science subsuming all. At the same time, I identify much more closely with the empiricist traditions within uh, philosophy, and I think those should be the dominant forces within philosophy. And empiricism isn't just scientism, it is philosophy. And you can do non-science philosophy without buying into, say, foundationalism or, more broadly speaking, rationalistic approaches to philosophy. So let's have a look at the chat before we keep going. Question third: has any philosopher ever made that specific scientific argument for anti-realism ever? Maybe. I don't know. I don't know exactly what you have in mind, and I don't know that Emerson's claiming that they do. Anscombe says, why is basing your belief on the best method of discovering knowledge something undesirable? It may be wrong, but it isn't clearly ideological. Yeah, that's a good point. So it might not be like you could. I think the idea here is, hey, if people are just seeing the successes of science and they're thinking, hey, science works everywhere else, it's super successful, maybe science is the solution to everything. Yeah, does that have to be rooted in ideology? No, but I do think that it very well might be a kind of. It also depends on how loosely we're talking about an ideology. So, I mean, we could discuss what an ideology is, and maybe some people would fall outside the scope of it, strictly speaking, being an ideology. So, I mean, you got a point there, but there does seem to me to be a whiff of ideology about the whole thing. But as far as the best method of discovering knowledge, I don't think science per se is always the best method of discovering knowledge. Like it depends on the question. Now, if you can define science to be so broad as to be any type of empirical work at all, and then I might agree with you. But there's going to be stuff where it's going to be a real stretch to call it science. So if you stretch science to be super inclusive, then you could say science encompasses everything. Maybe I would endorse that as an empiricist, but I don't see science to be so broad as to include all of empiricism. I see it as at least somewhat more local, and so there's going to be stuff that is going to fall slightly outside its scope, even if ultimately I'm an empiricist about it. So it's just not always going to be the best tool for the job. Again, that's assuming that we're distinguishing between science and empirical approaches more broadly. Because if we're talking about empirical approaches more broadly, and then that ends up just including empiricist approaches to philosophy, then what are you calling all pragmatists that they're just doing science when they're being pragmatists? That seems a little weird. And I certainly don't want people to gerrymander the language to say everything can be encompassed by science. Oh, right. Are there things you think continental philosophy gets better than analytic? I don't read that much analytic philosophy, or sorry, continental philosophy these days. There's going to be a lot of continental philosophy that I think is a completely obscure, nonsensical garbage. Like it's just pretentious crap. But you do get, I mean, stuff that continental philosophy can be better at on occasion. Sometimes it could be, I mean, obviously it's better at engaging with a certain type of literary aspect. A lot of analytic philosophy has this dry, stuffy quality, and continental philosophy can provide a kind of commentary on everyday life that might be missing from a lot of analytic philosophy. So it could do that. It might be able to better speak to certain aspects of our experience that fall outside the scope of the incidental set of technical concerns that occupy analytic philosophers. And so it might be better at addressing certain kinds of content merely because analytic philosophy doesn't really address that content very often, or when it does so in a way that's often so abstract and removed that there's something almost inhuman about it. And I do think that that's a problem with analytic philosophy. There's something almost alien in its approach to things. So like look at an analytic philosopher's analysis of things, and it's often just there's something off about it. That's not always the case. You do have analytic philosophers that are fairly down to earth, and you could see the humor running through certain people's writing. It's not always so stuffy and formalistic. So I'm speaking in very broad outlines here. Analytic philosophers have many different writing styles, and there are fabulous writers that bring literary elements and fun into their writing. There's ones that are just really good at being engaging, even if you disagree with him. So one example I remember from being a student is Nozick. I don't know if I have ever agreed with Nozick about anything, but Nozick was excellent at coming up with really evocative thought experiments that would really get people thinking and could strike up discussion. You could easily have a class going through a book from Nozick and talk about like the Wilt Chamberlain case and the experience machine and stuff. So again, it's a matter of like average, like the typical analytic philosophy paper I find to be rather dull, and the typical Continental philosophy work that I've seen is impenetrable, foggy nonsense. And so overall, I vastly favor analytic philosophy over Continental philosophy, but it certainly has its positives on occasion. I wouldn't write it off entirely. So I guess the main difference for me is a somewhat stylistic one. It's a tonal one. But, you know, I'm not an expert that is broadly read on all of these things, so I wouldn't be the best person to ask. Yeah, so David says, someday Lance and I got a debate. I think he meant gotta, rationalism versus empiricism. I don't know how that will go. We're just going to hit metaphilosophical bedrock so quickly. It's going to be a very frustrating and difficult conversation. Yeah. David says, I wonder if Lance considers me a fundamentalist Christian. I don't know enough about your views to know. Esther says, speaking of Bentham's Bulldog, do you have an opinion on bulldogs? Curious because I have one. I basically think breeding them is unethical. Okay. I've heard that I've heard people complain about the ethics of breeding certain kinds of animals where there's difficulties with their birth and medical difficulties and that sort of thing. I don't know enough about the facts, like the specific facts, but conditional on those facts being true, it does seem like you shouldn't intentionally bring about conditions in which animals would suffer needlessly in that process. So, but so you have a bulldog. I mean, I like dogs. So I got two dogs. They're upstairs right now. I've got a dachshund and a Jack Russell. So, and they different animals have their various issues. So, you got the back problems with the dachshunds. So, what can you do? Mason Colbert says, Lance, I can't remember. Are you a scientific realist or anti-realist? I don't really like the distinction. If someone says, hey, you have to position yourself within the analytic paradigm, I'd probably say I'm an anti-realist. But I mean, I'm a pragmatist. So it's not like I would say that the contents of scientific theories aren't true or that the things that they're describing aren't real. I'd say they are true and they are real. But I mean that in a pragmatist way. And that's not the way that I think scientific realists within analytic philosophy typically think that things are real. So, yeah. So David says Continental philosophy is mostly incoherent drivel, from what I can tell. That's my impression as well. Now, I do think that there are people that are proponents of Continental philosophy that sound competent and reasonable and have on occasion pointed to elements within it that don't look like incomprehensible drivel to me. And so I'm sure that's out there. I think it's unfortunate that kind of productive work is saddled with being part of a discipline that I think has so much nonsense in it. And even when stuff is meaningful, it's often buried under so much verbiage and jargon that it's not worth it to pry it out. Ben Singleton says Continental philosophy is more straightforward than many people think. Well, I don't find it to be, and I do find a lot of it just tedious and boring, and it's just not. It's not great. So,
Peter Van Inwagen refers to this as scientism, right? And he describes it as a sort of exaggerated respect for science, that is, the physical and biological sciences, and a corresponding disparagement of all other areas of human intellectual endeavor. And then, like the victims of scientism, it's just pervading their entire view of the world and everything, and it's like they're so dogmatically convinced, and on such little basis. I think it's crucially important. Like, I don't know, if a person is prepared to think rationally, it's crucially important to distinguish between something actually being scientifically supported, like there's scientific evidence for it, and then you're believing something just because having that belief kind of fits with being a science worshiper. And the second thing is not scientific, right? And so, like, yeah, and you might want to do it anyway, even though it's not scientific, but like we should draw that distinction, right? Because there being scientific evidence for something is like way better justification than it just fits with like my feelings about how great science is.
Mm-hmm. It has like sciencey vibes to it. Like, even though this isn't scientific, it has kind of, the right feel to it. And this other thing, even though it's not really in conflict with science, and it is, we know about it on the basis of other things, it's like, well, this just doesn't really have the right feel to it. Like someone who, like, I think someone, I can't remember who said this, but someone on Twitter said that the correct definition of naturalism is just stuff you could say to a scientist without them laughing at you. Like, that's what it actually means to be a naturalist.
Well, it depends on the scientist.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
A bunch of scientists are religious, so Isaac Newton was like, I think he spent the end of his life doing theology type stuff. So I don't know. He would probably laugh at you if you said there was no God. And,
it's uncomfortable for some of these people because you don't even have to go as far back as Isaac Newton. Like, because I guess they would just say, well, he was like an early, he was early in the history of science. But like, there are more recent people, like people like Einstein or some of the founders of like quantum mechanics, for instance. Like, they had all kinds of beliefs that people today, or at least these people who we're talking about, would consider like spooky or unscientific or like crazy.
Yeah, I think the thing is that it's still true that a lot of scientists have beliefs that I and a lot of other people would consider spooky or weird or whatever. I don't know how well those people partition those beliefs from their scientific practices, but I think there's lots of scientists that wouldn't laugh at various sorts of claims of the supernatural. I don't think scientists have a huge problem with the supernatural a lot of the time. So I don't know how they draw that separation out, because if you're a doctor and you believe in God and someone comes along and they start talking about like crystal therapy and magic healing, I think the doctor would laugh at that, but I think that they're probably laughing at it for good reason. But what's going to demarcate what they laugh at and what they don't, I don't know. I mean, it's going to be case by case basis, but this does bring to mind there does seem to be okay. I'll give one sort of area where I think that there's this like scientific ideological thing that's going on with people, and that's people that were kind of part of atheist activism in the US. At least I would see many of these people just sort of like cling to whatever scientific explanation that they thought superficially sounded like it might work, and if you give them some like they just you remember that stuff people talk about, the I fucking love science kind of thing. You get those kind of people that science became a kind of quasi religion kind of thing for them. I mean, not quite, but just real excited about science in a way that seemed performative and artificial. And if that's what they're referring to, I certainly think that's a thing. I don't think it's a big thing, though. I mean, that's a bit of an online thing. It's a bit of a thing among academics. So it might be overrepresented in the spaces in which Huemer and Emerson and I would operate. But socioculturally, I don't know how big of a deal it is. I mean, maybe it's bigger than I appreciate. I don't know. I mean, this is certainly a thing, but that needs to be kept very cleanly separated from more careful empiricists who are not, you could say, naively scientific. I mean, I don't consider myself to be one of these people, not because they're disparaging them. I'm on the receiving end of enough disparagement already. I am part of quite a few groups that are disparaged, but just because I recognize the vibe that they're describing here, and I would be critical of that too if the opportunity arose, I guess.
Crazy. Like a lot of those early like 20th century physicists were idealists and panpsychists even, which is something I've been, somewhat surprised to learn, but they had really interesting views about consciousness. A lot of them, if not most of them, were not materialists, but materialism has the right like sciencey kind of feel to it, so people are like, oh, they just kind of assume that all these people would be materialists, even though it's just historically not true. It's like easy to check up on.
Yeah. No, like so I don't have the list, but like, there are bunches of scientists who believe in consciousness and, believe in morality and believe in God even and all this stuff. So I know that doesn't seem good, but it doesn't seem like that good of a definition of naturalism or whatever. And anyway, like, I don't know, I'm being repetitive, but like the way that an actual scientist thinks isn't like the argument from laughter. Like, like this is not a scientific way of figuring out what's true. Like if you feel like laughing at something, you reject it, or like you survey other people and see if they laugh at it, or like the thing feels weird to you or something like that. None of that is scientific, right? Like a real scientific way of thinking is I start with an open mind. I assume that I don't know what exists and what's true, and then then I have to like look for evidence.
We have been talking, you started talking a little bit about phenomenal conservatism, which if people want a more thorough discussion of that, they can see our previous conversation on this channel where we talked about, phenomenal conservatism for a couple hours.
Yeah, Mason says, is it? I don't think we did surveys on those kinds of questions of physicists in Einstein's day. Yeah, I don't know if there are, there's probably not surveys, but maybe people have commented on the vibe at the time. I don't know if anybody did that. And if so, if we have a record of that, like somebody saying, oh, I went to the Royal Society and there sure were a lot of panpsychists there. Maybe he is. I don't know. I'm not a historian of philosophy. That'd be an interesting question to look into. I worry Emerson is cherry picking a few reputable scientists to make his argument. Well, I don't know that he's saying. I don't think he's cherry picking here because he's not making a statistical claim. I didn't hear him say anything like a majority of them were panpsychists. I think he's saying, hey, some prominent, highly reputable, reasonable scientists in the past had surprisingly open-minded metaphysical views where they weren't all a bunch of materialists. And I think that that's probably true. That's certainly my impression. He said a lot of them were idealists. I don't know how many. So if it turned out it's like 4 out of 100, okay, then maybe he's making like a lot has got to meet some minimum threshold. But I don't know if this claim is true or not. I mean, he's not making super specific claims here, but so, I don't think he's sticking his neck out too far here with this. So who knows? Well, actually, I say who knows almost rhetorically as if nobody knows. There's probably some people that know, and it sounds from the sound of it, it sounds like he's looked into this more than I have. But it's certainly the sort of thing that you could investigate and find out about. And what I doubt you would find is that there was virtual unanimity on some type of materialism or physicalism. I think you probably would find a diversity of views. It's my impression. I suspect that has been true. So I think he's probably roughly in the ballpark of being right about this. I don't think that's a reason to go, oh, okay, so physicalism is stupid and wrong. And I don't think he's saying it is. I think Emerson is just trying to draw attention to the fact that scientists historically, including the most reputable of scientists, have had quite a variety of different views about metaphysics, and they have not all just been this gaggle of like really hardcore. It's all like they haven't all been dogmatic materialists historically, and that strikes me as plausible. But it's an empirical question, so who cares how it strikes me? So I don't even care that much. Did he say that, Armand? Plenty of scientists aren't naturalists. They believe in things like consciousness. I don't know how many think consciousness is not natural, but there's going to be a lot of scientists that are like Christians, and so they're going to believe in souls and stuff. So there's going to be quite a lot that believe in supernatural stuff. That's just going to be true. Now, I know that they've given statistics on like members of like really prestigious academic organizations, and the atheist rates are really high. but I don't think that they're really high among, like, who are we counting as scientists? Does it have to be like people with PhDs publishing at universities? Does it have to be people that anybody with a PhD? Because you're going to have a lot of people that are not like academic scientists. There's a lot of like just, people that have degrees in science that are off working at regular jobs and stuff. They design pharmaceuticals or something. And a lot of those people are like I don't think the rates of atheism among those groups are like super duper mega high. And so a lot of those people are going to straight up believe in souls and the resurrection and life after death. They're going to believe in all kinds of stuff that doesn't fit into a scientific worldview so readily.
Hours, but it's pretty crucial to your view of moral objectivity. You're a moral non-naturalist, and specifically an ethical intuitionist. So you've got this metaphysical thesis of ethical non-naturalism, and then you've got the epistemic thesis of like phenomenal conservatism, and that's basically what ethical non-naturalism is, right? It's like the epistemic thesis of phenomenal conservatism with the metaphysical thesis of ethical non-naturalism. Is that like accurate?
Yeah, I guess that's right. Yeah. I mean, I want to say like, the reason, so that, phenomenal conservatism is basically the idea that, well, it's reasonable to assume that things are the way that they appear unless you have a reason for doubting that. So, and there's a particular type of mental state that you have where something seems to you to be the case. So I'm saying that's a type of experience.
Yes, this is the thing I don't think that there is. I don't think there is a mental. So notice what he says here. There's a particular type of mental state that's something that seems to be the case. That's exactly what he said.
Reason for doubting that. So, and there's a particular type of mental state that you have where something seems to you to be the case. So I'm saying
there's a particular type of mental state you have where something seems to you to be the case. So as far as I can tell, I don't have these mental states, and I very much doubt that other people do. I think people are doing various things like believing things, being disposed to believe things, that sort of thing. But something seems to be the case. I'm not sure that people have that as a mental state.
I'm saying that's a type of experience. It's not a belief.
No, he says it's a type of experience. So it's a type of experience. There's something so strange about that. So does it have a distinctive type of phenomenology? Because I don't have experiences of things seeming true. Like, if you give me an example, like if you present a case to me and you're like, hey, you give me a thought experiment, like the organ transplant scenario or something. And you ask me, do you think it would be wrong to harvest those organs? I'm going to, in this case, unless there's a bunch of extra specifications, I would say no, it wouldn't be moral to do that. Now, does that seem true? No, it doesn't seem true to me. I'm just telling you what, like, I wouldn't do that. It'd be the same thing like if someone said, hey, if I served you a bucket of sludge, would you want to eat it? No, but that doesn't seem true to me. I'd imagine eating that. I don't think I would like that. So I judge that I wouldn't want to do that. So there's no like special experiences. There's nothing distinctive intellectually going on. When I consider philosophical cases, I think about what I think is likely or what I think is true. But there's not any distinctive type of intellectual experiences. Certainly not ones where I have all the various senses. I see, I smell, I hear, and then I intellectualize certain sorts of phenomena in some quasi-sensorial way. Nothing like that happens for me, and I don't even know. Is that what he's talking about? Like, this seems so under-described psychologically. He's saying it's some type of mental state. So it sounds from his description like there's some distinctive type of psychology, but I don't know of any work in like the cognitive sciences that has established seemings as a type of phenomena that is the subject of any particular type of study. Like, think of like cognitive scientists, they'll study memory and various types of like perception and emotion and reasoning and deliberation. You could study things like reaction time, attention. There's different types of memory. So you can have semantic memory, episodic memory, working memory, long-term memory. So you could start dividing up aspects of human judgment and behavior and perception you could slice and dice it and subdivide it. And there's going to be various types of empirical evidence to support the existence of these various types of psychological states. Whoa, what's that? Right. Okay. I've had spiders crawling on me since I'm in a basement right now, and I think one just ran across my foot. Wait, where are you, spider? Okay. Well, so if I get bit by a spider, that would be an interesting thing to happen on here. Anyway, so like when has the empirical case for these things ever been established? Like, do philosophers get to just declare that there's altogether new types of mental states, and we don't need to do any empirical research to verify this? It's just something about this seems really strange. And then what you get is like other philosophers going along with this saying, yeah, I have these seemings too. And then that's apparently sufficient to establish that they're real. There's people that think they see auras. There's people that think they have telepathy. There's people that think they hear from God. There's all sorts of ways in which people can just be incorrect about the nature of their experiences and what's going on with them. I don't think philosophers are entitled to just presume to know how their own cognition works. I think we need to do research on this to find out what Huemer is talking about. Are these an actual type of mental state? Who has them? How do they develop them? Are there specific neurophysiological processes involved in these states? Do they differ across different philosophical domains? So like if you're reasoning about, or if you're having moral intuitions, are those different from metaphysical or epistemological intuitions? Do these draw on different psychological processes in the brain? Is it all one big process? If so, what parts of the brain are involved in this? Does this involve, functioning the occipital lobe? Is there a quasi visual aspect to it? If so, do blind people have different intuitions than non-blind people? Do people that are colorblind, do they reason differently? Would that matter? I mean, obviously probably not. But if this is like piggybacking off of parts of the brain involved in sense perception, is it almost like synesthesia? Like what exactly is going on here? And how does it work? And where is the research on this? Like he's just declaring that he has these states. Just because you think you have a state, it doesn't mean you do. So what can we say about that?
What type of experience you can have. And then a species of that is sensory appearances, where like,
So no, he says a species of that is sensory appearances. What? Is this how, would a cognitive scientist say, yeah, there's sensory appearances and then there's intellectual appearances. And these are all types of appearances. I don't even know if I have sensory appearances. What is an appearance? Like I guess you could say I have percepts or perceptual states. Like, and I could describe them too, right? So it seems like I'm sitting in a room where there's a microphone right here and I see them on the screen and I see me and there's two monitors here and there's a webcam right there. And like there's purple light behind me and the room is kind of dark and there's like a pillar over on the left and there's a wall right here on the right. So I could describe the sound. So I have a white noise playing in here. It sounds like rain. I could hear myself talking, and I could hear myself talking like from the inside of my head, because I would sound different if I was listening to a recording. So there's all sorts of aspects of my sense experience that I could describe. Are those appearances? If so, what makes them an appearance? What does that mean? And if we say that there's a category, appearances, and some of them are sensorial and some of them are non-sensorial, what do they have in common that makes them all appearances rather than something else? Like, it's just everything about this strikes me as underdescribed. Maybe Huemer describes this in his work somewhere, but is there an empirical component to this? Because I find it very implausible that he's done or draws on some substantive psychological literature that I've never heard of. I would imagine if it existed, someone would have pointed me to it already. Maybe I'm a big dum-dum and this is just in one of his books somewhere, but I have my doubts. This sounds like armchair speculative psychology. It doesn't sound like something that comports with anything that I've heard about in the study of human psychology. Mason says, also good question, how accurate are these seemings? 90%, 70%, 50%, and how do we measure seemings? Yeah, I don't know if they're measurable. I mean, a lot of this stuff, because Huemer relies to a significant extent on non-empirical approaches. So I don't even know how much of what he's saying is amenable to any particular type of empirical inquiry. And if so, which parts are and which parts aren't, and how we find out and how we determine that and what we do about that. Like, there's just so many questions I have here. And I worry that methodologically speaking, and I worry that Huemer is just glossing over what I take to be a lot of legitimate questions, and not just questions, but questions that are underwritten by a degree of considerable skepticism. So Harmonica Luke, just to go back to this, he had quoted, plenty of scientists aren't naturalists. They believe in things like consciousness. This assumed non-naturalist theory of consciousness. And yeah, Huemer said that. Yeah, so you do have this thing. So when philosophers talk about consciousness, a lot of them, they sometimes draw distinctions, access consciousness, that kind of thing. But one of the one that's been central to discussions in analytic philosophy is this idea of phenomenal consciousness. I am a skeptic of this. I don't even think it's meaningful. But there are some philosophers that deny that we have phenomenal consciousness. They may or may not say that we have some other kind of non-phenomenal form of consciousness. But if a scientist says they believe in consciousness, just start talking to them. I've spoken to my wife about consciousness, and I've tried explaining what philosophers think phenomenal consciousness is. And my impression is she's just like, yeah, nah, that's not how I think about it. So scientists saying that they believe in consciousness does not entail and isn't even necessarily good evidence that they believe in phenomenal consciousness. And what philosophers might say is they might say, well, this is a common sense notion of consciousness. Well, that's an empirical question, whether or not the notion of consciousness that anybody says that they endorse is this particular notion, and that the notion of phenomenal consciousness is widely shared among non-philosophers. There's been like one study on Mary's room that shows that a lot of non-philosophers will report that Mary learned something. I'm very skeptical of those results. I question whether the participants in these studies really understand what philosophically is at stake and what the question is trying to get at. But there has been work that also tries to look without using a thought experiment or using a variety of other sorts of methods. Sitzma, Mashri, Ozdemir, I don't know how to say the name. There's been a few people that have been looking at whether or not non-philosophers employ mental state attributions in a way that matches the pattern of mental state attributions that philosophers employ, and that would support a distinction between phenomenal states and non-phenomenal states. And so far their findings are, it doesn't look like most non-philosophers do this. It looks like most non-philosophers think about mental states and attribute mental states in ways that don't comport with the way that philosophers do. There's also been some research showing that non-philosophers, and this might have been academics, I can't remember. But I think it is. I think it's like academics other than philosophers think about epistemology, I think, or knowledge. I think it's knowledge differently from philosophers. Let me see if I can find that in a second. Yep, I found it. So here's the paper. Expert or esoteric, philosophers attribute knowledge differently than all other academics. I'll throw a link in the chat. And so I'll just read the abstract. Academics across widely ranging disciplines all pursue knowledge, but they do so using vastly different methods. Do these academics therefore also have different ideas about when someone possesses knowledge? Recent experimental findings suggest that intuitions about when individuals have knowledge may vary across groups. In particular, the concept of knowledge espoused by the discipline of philosophy may not align with the concept held by lay people. Across 2 studies, we investigate the concept of knowledge held by academics across 7 disciplines. Oh, it is lay people. Okay. And compare these judgments to those of philosophers and lay people. We find that academics and lay people share a similar concept of knowledge, while philosophers have a substantially different concept. These experiments show that in contrast to philosophers, other academics and lay people attribute knowledge to others in some Gettier situations. B, academics and lay people are much less likely to attribute knowledge when reminded of the possibility of error, but philosophers are not affected by this reminder. And C, non-philosophy academics are overall more skeptical about knowledge than lay people or philosophers. These findings suggest that academics across a wide range of disciplines share a similar concept of knowledge, and that this concept aligns closely with the intuitions held by lay people, and differs considerably from the concept of knowledge described in the philosophical literature, as well as the epistemic intuitions of philosophers themselves. So it's the sort of thing you should always take these kinds of findings with a grain of salt. The study looked interesting to me. This is not one I've investigated before. It could turn out that these are like performance errors, sensitivity to pragmatics, and that if you peeled all that away, that lay people and non-philosopher academics would endorse a similar view of knowledge as philosophers. And so what you're seeing is variation due to philosophers just being better at thinking. So it's certainly possible, And it also doesn't strike me as radically implausible. I mean, knowledge is the centerpiece of what a lot of philosophers, so I said, philosophers, let me get another drink. That's what happens when you live stream, fumble over your words. It's certainly possible that these findings can be explained not as there being a genuine commitment to or deployment of very different concepts, and that philosophers are just weird and idiosyncratic. It could be that non-philosophers are responding to the questions. They're responsive to considerations that philosophers are not responsive to, and that there's like normative reasons not to be. And so were lay people and non-philosophers responsive appropriately to what the question's intent is, they would give similar answers, so that they might be sensitive to things that they really shouldn't be sensitive to. So if that's the case, that could explain away these results, but it's also possible, no, maybe philosophers are just weird. But again, the point here isn't like, is this study right or wrong? Because we're not going to establish this with a single study. This is an empirical question. And philosophers are not in a position to just presume to know that the way that they use concepts is the way that non-philosophers use concepts. They typically, or I don't know if I say typically, they frequently make these presumptions, and these are empirical presumptions, and they're often wrong. And they seem to think that they, in virtue of being competent English speakers, are in a position to generalize from the way that they think to the way everybody else does. And they're not. They're just not. And if they think that they are, they're welcome to present empirical evidence of that. So, I mean, you do have this kind of inescapable problem here, which is the questions being posed are empirical questions. Like the questions like, what do most people think about the nature of knowledge? That's an empirical question. You cannot establish that without doing empirical work. Now, someone could disagree with me about that second claim. So the first claim, it's an empirical question. It is. I'm not going to argue about that. If someone says, okay, but we don't need to do a bunch of psychological research to find out what the answer to that question is, we can consult our own intuitions, because our own intuitions are a reliable guide to like how the terms are used. Okay, so if you want to generalize from how you use terms to how everybody uses the terms, sorry to tell you, that's an empirical question. Questions about the generalizability of a result that's obtained for you and your colleagues or your buddies, those are empirical questions, and you're not entitled to presume that they generalize. You have to do the research. So you have a kind of second order empirical barrier to philosophers doing this, and they've never convincingly shown that they have the acumen to correctly predict how non-philosophers think across a wide range of areas in a consistent way. So that's not a thing philosophers have shown that they could do. So maybe they could do it, but they'd have to empirically demonstrate their ability to figure out how people think non-empirically first. And they haven't done it. Okay. Let's keep going, I guess.
Look down and there looks to be a table there. Okay, that's an example of something seeming to you. But also there's another species where you think about something intellectually and it just seems correct to you. Okay, and so as a species of that, sometimes you think about some possible action and it seems to you to be a wrong action, right? And so, okay, so like what I'm saying we start with is, well, let's start by just assuming that the things that seem wrong are wrong, unless and until we have a reason to think otherwise. And then like the reason for being a realist is that, well, okay, you have to think through the three different versions of anti-realism.
So when I think things are wrong, nothing about this could plausibly be construed in realist terms. So what I'm thinking is, I don't like that thing. I don't want it to happen. Like I'm discovering something about my attitudes, my dispositions to act. I don't just like think it's wrong in some undifferentiated way and then go, okay, well, we start with the fact that I think it's wrong. Now I got to figure out what it means for me to think it's wrong. Does it mean that it's inconsistent with my goals and desires? Or does it mean that it's against the standards of my culture? Or does it mean that it's wrong in accord with an independent set of independent set of moral facts? No. I just, if you say, hey, would it be wrong to torture babies? I have to basically take your wrong, like, do you really disapprove of and want people to not torture babies? Yes, I really disapprove of it, and I don't want them to torture babies. That's how I take a question like that. And so then there isn't a further question of like, what meta-ethical account best accounts for that? The work has already been done. So there isn't something further to say. So Huemer's going to say a bit more here, but I have to take a quick break. I will be back. Actually, I guess I'll just play it and I'll come right back.
Anti-realism. And then they all just have very counterintuitive implications. So like the nihilist view implies that, oh, it's not wrong to torture people for fun. And the non-cognitivist view implies that, well, it doesn't make sense to say if such and such is wrong, then something else is the case, right? And then the subjectivist view implies, it's actually correct that if we were to approve of torturing people, it would be right. Okay, so like all those seem wrong. So like it's not that realism is directly intuitive; it's that these premises are intuitive that refute the three versions of anti-realism.
Right. And I don't know, people have this like black and white approach to phenomenal conservatism that I've noticed sometimes. Like if you say anything nice about intuition, then people will, they'll immediately point to like appearances that are like deceptive or something like that. So, phenomenal conservatism is not the idea that you should just believe all appearances, like full stop. Like you just held up a book at the beginning of our conversation that's pretty large about ethical intuitionism. So I mean, like just the existence of that book should like, yeah, if it's just like, well, it seems to me that moral realism is true, the end. Like then that book would be like 1 page long. But it's it's obviously they are suffering from some kind of misunderstanding of phenomenal conservatism if they think that it's just it seems to me that this is the case, and I'm not convinced by any of the defeaters, so end of story. Like there's still a place for evidence and still a place for arguments and like reasoning about things, which is why that book is very long and not very short.
Yeah. So the view is not that appearances end the investigation. Like you just look at how things appear and then that's the end of the story. The view is that is the beginning, right? As you start from the way things appear, not that's the whole investigation, right? But that is important because you have to have a starting point, right? And like, what's the alternative view? Okay, so we could start from how.
A couple things. One, Emerson really does seem to be very focused on like his worst critics or the people that disagree with him for bad reasons. He's commenting on that a lot. That's fine. It's important to point out the bad mistakes and like the misunderstandings that people have. But he seems to be focusing on that almost to the exclusion of engaging with people that take a more critical approach that's not quite so silly or easy to dismiss. My own included. Like I haven't seen him engage much with my critiques, and it would be nice because I think I'm right about this stuff. If I'm wrong, I'd like to know that I'm wrong. So I'd like to get good criticisms, but I just want to see I'm just curious. What would a critique of my perspective on this look like? So I mean, that's just one point. And if we go back to what Huemer was saying, he was saying how you don't really have this like direct realist intuition. Instead, you have this kind of two-step process. So you think, baby torture seems wrong. Well, and then how do you account for that? Well, you look at the various sorts of anti-realist ways of looking at that, and they all have these implausible conclusions. I don't buy it. I don't have that reaction to those accounts. I don't have that reaction to any of those accounts because in all of those cases, it looks like somebody just being silly about words. And I know that's a kind of shallow way to put it, but let's walk through them. So if you're non-cognitivist, you think that moral claims aren't propositional, so they can't be true or false. So then if you take a claim like torturing babies for fun is wrong, you would say, yeah, that statement's not true. Now, this is supposed to be counterintuitive. Oh, so we're going to think it's not wrong to torture babies? Well, hold up now. If what you think is that statement expresses a person's emotion, so that while it looks superficially like a person is saying it's wrong to torture babies, but that is best translated as something like torturing babies, boo! Okay, well, if that's what people mean, then yeah, it's not going to be true or false. What's the issue here? What's supposed to be counterintuitive? Either that's what people mean or it's not. Like, are we determining what people mean based on whether we like how what they mean sounds or we find it like appealing or plausible? Like, how is this supposed to work? Like, if that's what people mean, that's what people mean. And if you don't like it, like, tough shit, So if we went out and we did empirical research and it turns out that when people say torturing babies for fun is wrong, they mean torturing babies, boo. Well, then that's what people mean when they say it. And so then I would say, yeah, apparently that's what that means when that person says it over there, and that person, and that person, and that person. That's how people use the language. It's just going to be an empirical question. So what is my armchair intuition supposed to be doing here? What is it supposed to be doing? So they're expressing emotion, and so it's not true that it's wrong to torture babies. Okay, Why would that sound wrong to you? Unless you had, like in this case, you already were inclined towards realism in the first place. So if I think there's stance-independent moral facts, and so that such that things are right or wrong, there's facts about what's right or wrong. Obviously, if someone says, "Hey, morality is exhausted by my attitudes," I'm going to go, "No, it's not. There's facts about what's right or wrong." But then it's your pre-existing commitment to realism that's doing the work of causing you to judge the person to be mistaken about what they mean. It's not like this almost seems to be getting things backwards. It's like you're starting as a realist and then you're realizing all these things are wrong because you're already a realist, or you're just, or you have this realist inclination buried deep inside you. But I don't have that inclination buried deep inside me. So I don't have this reaction to non-cognitivists. If when people say torturing babies for fun is wrong, if they say, "Yeah, I'm just telling you, boo," it's not, and so then you get the statement, "It's true." You would say it's not true that it's wrong to torture babies for fun. Okay, yeah. So like technically that would be true. So why am I supposed to find that counterintuitive? What's supposed to be counterintuitive about that? Now, what this looks like is if I, imagine I was just walking down the street and I turned to somebody, it's a busy street, busy day. Someone's walking their dog. There's people sitting in a Starbucks. Yeah, let's say I go up to some people sitting in a Starbucks and having a coffee, and they lean on the table and they say, "Hey," and they both look at me and they're like, "Ugh," and I go, "It's not wrong to torture babies for fun. It's not wrong." Like they're going to be freaked out. Why? Because I mean, first, it's socially just very weird. But second, for someone to say, or sorry, I should say in this case, it's not true that it's wrong to torture babies for fun. So let's say I say that. It's not true that it's wrong to torture babies for fun. I mean, one, that's already a very awkward locution. Most people would say it's not true that it's wrong. They would just, they probably phrase things a little differently. But what you're doing in a lot of these contexts, if you say those sorts of things, is they carry pragmatic implications about what you mean. And in that case, you might be expressing a plan of action or an attitude or a disposition. It would be very weird. And so you'd be conveying more information than just the technical content of what the non-cognitivist is committed to. The non-cognitivist is committed to something conditional here, which is that conditional on the fact that people are expressing no propositional content. When they say torturing babies for fun is wrong, that's not technically true. If they're right on the conditional, then like too bad. Too bad if that's what people mean. You know what I mean? Like, if that's just what people mean, why are your intuitions going to be diagnostic about whether what they're saying is true or not? Whether what they're saying is true is conditional on what they mean, not your reaction to what they mean. There's something very strange about this. And then this just applies in the other two cases too. So error theory has the same process. So the error theorist thinks all first order moral claims are false. So it's wrong to torture babies. They would say it's false. And so it's false that it's wrong to torture babies. It sounds like you're okay with torturing babies. It sounds like you're not against torturing babies. Well, that sounds bad, but that's not what an error theorist is committed to. And then the same thing with subjectivism is you get something like this. If someone thinks it's okay to torture babies, then it is okay for them to torture babies. So, I mean, that could be potentially misleading because we're not disambiguating agent and appraiser relativism. We've talked about that a bazillion times. But then also, like, if you're an appraiser relativist, again, this is just going to turn out to be trivially true, because it turns out that if someone says torturing babies is okay for me to do, and all they mean is that they approve of torturing babies, and they do approve of torturing babies, it's trivially true that the person approves of torturing babies. That has no implications for you. You could be like, okay, you've informed me that you're an evil psychopath. Now I'm going to stop you. So all of these views, they might, like, I think the counterintuitiveness that they appear to have either derives its appeal from a pre-existing implicit commitment to moral realism, and whether or not a person has that is an empirical question or a fact about that person's psychology. Sure, maybe Huemer thinks that way, but it's an open empirical question whether any particular proportion of other people think that way. I don't think the evidence shows that they do. And then in the other case, I think that this often sounds rhetorically very appealing to people on being confronted with this description because they're sensitive to the pragmatic features of these statements. And so I think that these tests don't work. I think that they're misleading. I think maybe philosophers can navigate around them, but I suspect philosophers are responsive to the pragmatic features just like lay people, and that this might literally be like a consistent performance error on the part of philosophers to respond in this way to these sorts of things. Not necessarily Huemer, but I think at least some subset of people are not reasoning well about these sorts of cases. I think they're getting tripped up over language. Okay. Let's look at the chat. Yeah. Mason says, the three versions coming up again. I mean, this is another dispute, and it'd be great to talk to Huemer about it sometime. I don't think there's just three positions. You have pluralism, you have incoherentism, you have quietism. You're going to have a variety of other positions. I don't endorse any of the three positions. And Huemer has even said they're the only possible positions, and that's just not true. All right. Mason says, okay, so there's bad appearances. Great. Let's evaluate the success fail rate. Yeah, how do we do that? Is that another empirical question? Taz says, if Huemer's main argument against anti-realism is that it leads to the repugnant conclusion that torturing a child for fun isn't objectively wrong, doesn't his reasoning backfire if the moral truth discovered by a rational, emotionally neutral psychopathic agent turned out to be that it's objectively right? And we all ought to do it regardless of circumstances. Yeah, I've raised these points against realists, and I don't think that they give good responses. They'll say, well, the moral facts are necessary, and so that's not going to happen. Okay, then what if the necessary moral facts are that you've got to torture babies or something? I don't find the responses that they give to this particularly satisfactory. If any realists want to come on my channel and talk to me about that, I've got to vet you to make sure you're not going to like scream or be insane. But I'd be happy to talk to a realist about that kind of hypothetical, that counterfactual, where the moral facts are radically misaligned with your subjective values or your preferences. You find them repugnant. Like, what do you do then? Because I still find the responses that I get to that highly enigmatic. Which of course could be that I'm not understanding why they have a great response to that. But Clashman says, same here. When I think about moral cases, it feels the same as introspecting about what I would prefer questions, just with much higher stakes. Exactly. So it's not like it's trivial, like what would I prefer to have for dinner or what am I going to watch on Netflix? It is much higher stakes, but it's much higher stakes in the way if someone was like, if someone's like threatening to kill you unless you like give them your life savings or, you do something else. There could be very high stakes, completely prudential questions that are obstacles you could be faced with where they'd be high stakes. And the moral questions just kind of feel like that. And sometimes the moral stakes are like the stakes in moral scenarios are pretty low. Like, should I, tell a white lie or something like that? So yeah, nothing about moral reasoning or any of my normative deliberation ever feels realist to me from the inside, not even a little bit. Just one response from Clashman. If our intuitions, this is in quotes, if our intuitions sucked at detecting the moral truth and the moral facts turn out to be pro-torture, then we trivially ought to torture people. I'm not quite sure what you're getting at there. Tez says, if an anti-realist denies that torturing babies for fun can be objectively wrong or right, is that truly worse than a realist who accepts the possibility that it could be objectively right? Yeah, this is one of the things about these sorts of scenarios. So if you're like, I don't have the realist intuitions Huemer has in response to these, but let's just suppose that error theorists are correct and it's not wrong to torture babies or whatever. What's so bad about that? Why is that bad? Because if someone goes, oh my God, you don't think it's wrong to torture babies? Let's say it's not. I don't know about you. I'm still going to be exactly like nothing changes for me. I'm still exactly as against baby torture as I was before I learned that it's not wrong. It doesn't change my attitudes or dispositions or anything. Who cares? I don't care. Why would you care about that? Just the whole thing just seems so empty to me. Oh, right. Right.
How things seem to us, or we could start by assuming nothing. Okay, and then what's the next step after that?
Right. I lost track of what he was talking about. Let me take it back.
Not that, and the investigation. Like you just look at how things appear, and then that's the end of the story. The view is that is the beginning, right? As you start from the way things appear, not that's the whole investigation, right? But that is important because you have to have a starting point, right? And like, what's the alternative view? Okay, so we could start from how things seem to us, or we could start by assuming nothing. Okay, and then what's the next step after that? Right. So we start with skepticism about everything, or maybe skepticism about every positive claim or something. And then what's the next step after that? The next step after that is the end, because there's no way to take any step because you don't have any claims that you're allowed to accept, right? Because you're skeptical about everything, right? So, okay.
You could also start with what seems false to you. We could start there.
Yeah. Why don't we assume that things are the way they appear not to be? I don't know, but that just seems kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like the important part, like you said, it's not the end of the conversation, but it can form this bedrock. Like once you get to moral intuition, you don't just dismiss it. It's not like, well, the only thing supporting this view ultimately is moral intuition. So end of conversation. You can't trust intuitions. This ultimately rests on some kind of bedrock of intuition. So it's all out. Like, I think a lot of people think that way. And I agree with you that it's, fundamentally confused, but some people think that intuition is like a bad word. And if you can get people to admit that ultimately this is going to be on some kind of bedrock of intuition or seemings or something, then they're just like, oh, well, I win.
Yeah, I mean, I should say, like, okay, so sometimes things are not the way they appear, right? So like maybe this is the most popular type of objection. I can think of 3 cases of something that is not the way it seems. Okay, so therefore, what? Therefore, skepticism about everything.
Yeah, again, they're focusing on what I take to be the weaker objections, which again, there's a sense in which this is fine. But how do they handle cases where a person has different seemings than them? Or, in my case, I'm skeptical that anybody has seemings at all. But, if they're right that people have seemings, then, to the extent that I can make any sense, even like some analog sense to what they're talking about. So I don't think I have seemings. But, back against the wall, if somebody says, does it seem to you like realism is true? I wouldn't just say no. I would say it seems like it's not true. Like I don't have a nice way to put it. Like nothing seems sillier to me. It seems like obviously wrong. And it seems to me the position is wrong. It seems to me that these arguments that Huemer uses are not good. That at every critical juncture in one of these arguments where I'm supposed to evaluate it based on my own intuition, my intuitions run contrary to Huemer's. And this is like a consistent pattern. It just, you could almost take everything Huemer has ever said about metaethics and like just put a tilde next to it and just negate all of it. And that's how I'm naturally disposed to think. Now, at what point am I supposed to think I'm misguided and mistaken here? Why? Like, it just seems like, to me, like I have a seeming that he's wrong. And I have a seeming that there's linguistic confusions going on. And I have a seeming that they're making catastrophic errors. Like, if we're going to go the a prioristic route, I'm still going to be an anti-realist. And if anything, I'd probably be a lot more confident of an as an anti-realist, because I might be like an analytic anti-realist. Like I would just say, oh yeah, well, it's just an analytic fact about normative claims that they're stance dependent. The end of discussion. That's just what they are. Squares have 4 sides, and normative claims depend on stances. The end of discussion. Like that's how it seems to me. I mean, they might say, okay, no, it's not the end of discussion, because it's not just how it seems to you. Okay, well, what arguments are they going to give me? Are we going to look like a convergence argument? I think we have better explanations for convergence than positing moral realism. Ontological argument, we're going to have questions about intelligibility. And then you're also going to have other criticisms I've seen. I know, I think Marcus Arvan has a paper out now, but those aren't the ones I have in mind. The ones I have in mind, some of them have been shared online, but not all of them. So I'm not going to talk about those. I don't remember them anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So I saw them, I thought they were good, and then I don't remember them. So it's not like anyway, just the point would be that I don't find the arguments for moral realism any better. Like I don't have the intuitions, and then I don't find the arguments like even a little bit compelling. So I don't find Huemer's arguments compelling. I don't find Cuneo's arguments compelling. I certainly don't find anything Moore says to be compelling. Moorian shifts are not going to work on me because that's not how things seem to me. So like, what do realists have? that's supposed to work for, like you have Enoch's deliberative indispensability. That I don't think that one works. So I don't find any of these arguments even like a little bit compelling. They don't even move the dial up for me that much. So, if anything, if I had to evaluate the weight of the combined weight of all these arguments, it's a feather, and it's not so clear to me that that's even true of arguments for theism. And I'm a rather staunch atheist. And, it's not like I think like fine tuning doesn't move the dial at all. I think fine tuning alone moves the dial probably. I'll put it this way. I think that fine tuning might move the dial for me more towards theism than every single argument for moral realism combined moves me away from moral anti-realism. That is how much moral realism seems false to me. Now, a realist might say I'm in the grip of a theory, I'm in the grip of a theory. I'll just say they're in the grip of a theory. Unless they're going to bring some sort of empirical weight to bear, that's just armchair psychology, and that doesn't get us anywhere. So, what can I say? Clashman says, if you reject phenomenal conservatism, what is exactly stopping you from accepting a proposition? What does he mean you can't accept anything? I don't know what he means. You could probably accept things. I don't think you have to endorse phenomenal conservatism. Jeremy Gord says, the problem isn't starting with appearances. Yeah, I agree. I don't think, look, we can grant phenomenal conservatism for the sake of argument, and I think almost nothing that Huemer argues for follows from that. If anything at all, or we could reject it anyway. So it might have problems. I would suspect if I dug into it, I would have problems with it and I would end up rejecting it. But even if I accept it, I don't think that really is going to get Huemer towards me accepting moral realism. The problem is, the problem isn't starting with appearances. The problem is the armchair rationalist continuation as opposed to the empiricist one. Right. So let's say we're all phenomenal conservatives. Okay, I'm still an empiricist too. And then I think anti-realism wins handily. All right, I'm looking through the chat. Oh, right. Let's keep going.
About everything. And, I note that, like, actually part of why I started doing epistemology, like I wrote my epistemology book before the ethics book, was that many of the arguments against moral realism are actually just general skeptical arguments. They're just like the arguments that the ancient skeptics gave for why you shouldn't trust anything, except instead of saying that, they say you shouldn't trust any moral judgments. Okay. But so, like the ancient skeptics would do this thing. They would give you like 3 examples of times when the senses misled you. And then they would say, see, you can't trust the senses. So now, since that's your source of knowledge about the whole external world, now you know nothing about the external world. Okay, what's wrong with that? I mean, one thing is, we could maybe just doubt our observations in the particular case they've been found to be unreliable, not all cases, right? Like, okay, so, sometimes it's dark or you're not wearing your glasses or whatever, like maybe you should mistrust your judgments then. That doesn't mean that all sensory judgments are unreliable. Okay. And then you could say a similar thing about moral judgments. Mm-hmm. So like, I agree, sometimes moral judgments are unreliable. So
yeah, so I don't appeal to these arguments. So this doesn't do anything for me. I think that the reasons why I don't think that there are stance independent moral facts are going to be quite similar to the reasons I don't think people could see auras. So that's a very short way of putting it. So if people think that they could see auras, they're welcome to provide us with some model or theory about what they're doing, how it works, and how we can test it. And then we try to find out. And then it's not going to fit into our best models of the world. So I'm going to have an abductive argument that looks at the content of what moral realists are positing is true. And then I'm going to say, look, if I offer an account of the world, is there going to be any set of observations where I'm just not able to explain some observation or phenomena without positing moral facts? And I think the answer is going to be no. And what I would have to do is explain why there's this small group of people that claim that they can like see the moral truth, or they have intellectual appearances of moral facts. And what I would offer is some sort of cultural debunking argument. What I would say is we can chart a sociocultural trajectory from the kinds of cultures, societies, intellectual subcommunities that these people are part of, that is causing them to systematically be inducted into thinking in ways that cause a kind of intellectual mirage where they're seeing things that aren't really there. And this would be coupled with empirical evidence that, for instance, I don't think that morality is a cultural universal. I think it's culturally contingent and invented by particular cultures. I don't think that it directly necessarily threatens realism, but it builds into the empirical case that supports the contention that the way in which Huemer is thinking is a product of being enculturated and in a particular way and being part of particular intellectual subcommunities. And I think it's those subcommunities that cause him to think that he's able to see moral truth. And I don't think that there's any good model of the way human cognition works that would ever posit such a thing. I just don't think this is a faculty or capacity that anybody has. So, I think it's quite important in a kind of roundabout or indirect way, the empirical case that I make and that a few others have made, that non-philosophers, generally speaking, are not moral realists. I think that's important because, it would be, if we're talking about general skepticism, the general skeptic is saying stuff like, objects don't exist. The sky doesn't exist. Time doesn't exist. But I don't think that there would be any plausible construal of ordinary human thinking where people don't think objects and time and that sort of thing exists. And so the general skeptic is going against widely shared attitudes or perceptions or conceptions of what the world is like in some way. Whereas I think that Huemer and Emerson here have highly idiosyncratic beliefs. I don't think it's true that most people react to moral considerations or think about morality or do morality in a way that comports with his realist conception of it. I don't even think everybody has moral thoughts at all. Moral terminology is not lexicalized in every culture. I think if, prior to the spread of monotheism and Christianity in particular, all over the world, that you would have found lots of communities where it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to translate the term. There's already still existing some communities where they just don't have cognate terms and they have a different sort of normative structure to the way that they think about things. I think that this is a culturally idiosyncratic way of thinking about things. So it's not culturally idiosyncratic to perceive objects or time. There's something, I don't think this is some sort of evolved feature of human cognition. I think this is something that people have acquired through their culture. And if that could be shown, or you could make a good case for that, you're not going to convince people that think this way. But I already find this fairly compelling that this is likely what's happened.
We should be careful about the circumstances in which they're unreliable. But that doesn't mean that we can't trust any moral judgments ever, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, we make unreliable judgments in literally every context. Like people make missteps and errors, like, in history, people make historical missteps. There's this really quick step that a lot of people make. I mean, like this is like kind of it's not cliche to bring up, but like people bring it up so much because it's so like universally experienced, where when you're talking to someone who is just starting to get into philosophy, then they become like a moral subjectivist, like almost immediately because of like moral disagreement. Like people disagree, like different cultures disagree. Someone who is just starting to get into philosophy, then they become like a moral subjectivist, like almost immediately because of like moral disagreement. Like people disagree, like different cultures disagree. Like they become aware, like, oh, part of like my beliefs are partially culturally determined. I guess there are no facts about.
Yeah, and it's very weird that people do this. So I don't know exactly how they're going to go on to criticize this, but it's really weird to the extent that this would be true. I don't know. Like here, Emerson, I think, is speculating, not terribly implausibly, that people respond to the discovery of widespread moral disagreement by inferring that some type of subjectivism or relativism or whatever is true. That seems plausible to me. I don't think that there's direct empirical evidence showing why exactly or like why student relativists think the way that they do. But you do have this phenomenon of student relativism. I certainly experienced this in my classes. Students report endorsing some type of relativism or anti-realism. It's super, super common. And, if you ask people, sometimes they will say, well, different people have different beliefs. Okay, different people have different beliefs about what's true scientifically. People have different beliefs about what's true historically. People have different beliefs about what's true in religious terms, does that mean that they're like everybody is right with respect to their respective beliefs? And I sometimes get people saying yes to that. Okay, I'm like, all right, so Christians and Hindus disagree. So Jesus both is the Son of God and is the one true God, and he's not. How does that work? So you do get some oddities there. So if they're inferring this from the presence of disagreement and they're like weirdly only doing this for morality, that's I don't get it. Like I don't appeal to arguments from disagreement. The fact that people disagree, like especially not crude ones, like the mere fact that there's lots of disagreement is not a good reason to think that there's no stance independent fact of the matter. It's just not.
About moral judgments, and it's like, it just seems so obvious. Like people disagree about everything. It doesn't mean there's like no fact of the matter about those things.
That happens if you introduce them to philosophy through metaethics. If you introduce them to philosophy through epistemology, then they quickly become global skeptics or something like that. And for similar reasons, right? You could be like, okay, well, your beliefs about the world are culturally conditioned, which is true. There's like an amazing.
Maybe they're not giving students enough credit. I think students are picking up on something important here. And I worry that academic philosophers get frustrated with this and just dogmatically double down on the realism when there are viable alternatives to this. Maybe there's something to students' reactions to this. And the way that they're describing this, it does worry me that the skepticism kind of gets beat out of students intellectually and academically.
Amazing correlation between people's descriptive beliefs and the culture that they were brought up in. So therefore, you can't trust can't trust beliefs that are, outside of your immediate observation or something. Okay, and then you want to say something like, oh no, but our culture has like very good science to determine the truths. And how do you know that? Because other people in your culture told you that was true, right? Other people told you that we have science and that science is reliable and whatever, right? Okay, and like, the people in other cultures, like the people around them told them that they have whatever divine revelation and that was reliable, which like, okay, you might think, well, the science story sounds more credible, but no, I mean, what, like, if there's divine revelation, that would be totally reliable. Like,
yeah.
So anyway, but my point though is not to. Right, my point is not that the science is no better than religious beliefs and primitive cultures or whatever, right? But it's just like it is true that people's beliefs are very much conditioned by the culture that they live in, but that doesn't mean that you don't know, right?
Mm-hmm. Or there's just no fact of the matter, or like that's just the weirdest step to me though. But yeah, I mean, it does seem like it obviously generalizes past moral claims. Like you said, a lot of the moral skeptical arguments are really just skeptical arguments, like fitted for morality specifically. But the argument from disagreement. So this was the first chapter I read in ethical intuitionism. Actually, I was trying to read stuff about moral disagreement, so I read that chapter first. And yeah, for anyone who's interested in the topic of moral disagreement, then definitely read that chapter.
So Uncle Muscle says, I remember my Kantian ethics teacher teaching error theory. He was on a mission against it. This is something that I need to do a research project on at some point, which is to survey students, maybe graduate students in philosophy, undergraduates in ethics courses or something, on their perception of their instructor's sentiments towards anti-realism and the various types of anti-realism, relativism, error theory, non-cognitivism, and then survey the instructors and see what their attitudes are. One thing you might predict is that students perceive a hostility towards or opposition towards anti-realist views, and they're correct about it. And certainly, like, textbooks give short shrift to the anti-realist views, and I think often caricature them or do a bad job of raising objections against them. And I suspect this attitude of contempt or disdain for anti-realist perspectives is visible in the way that many philosophers deal with the topic. And then it should come as no surprise if philosophers that get through the filter and end up in PhD programs and end up being professional philosophers, if they end up endorsing these views, you're getting selection effects, and you're getting induction, like selection effects, both because, like, in other words, people that are more disposed towards realism are more likely to choose these fields because they're more welcoming and encouraging. But you're also going to get a kind of like an attrition where people are pushed out and then you're going to get a kind of coercion. So you have a number of phenomena going on here where, you know, at the highest level, you've got 62% moral realists. Okay, well, how did people get there? Well, if the field is already one that is more disposed towards abstract approaches, it's less constitutionally empiricist in its disposition, it's already likely to attract more rationalistically than empirically inclined people than engineering or biology or physics for fairly obvious reasons. So from the very outset, you're getting a self-selected group of people that are choosing to major as undergraduates in philosophy. And of course, philosophy undergraduates are more likely to pursue graduate training in philosophy than non-philosophy undergraduates. So you get this disposition from the very outset. Now, I don't have any empirical research confirming this, but it'd be remarkable if it wasn't true, that there are no personality differences or psychological facts that would predict the sorts of people that choose to major in and pursue philosophy as an undergraduate than people that don't. And it would be further surprising if there were no dispositional or personality differences between the people that go to graduate school. And then further, that there'd be no dispositional differences or personality differences between people that ultimately land successful jobs and continue publishing in academia. You have multiple like gates or filter points at which people go from being a non-philosopher to a professional academic philosopher publishing work in philosophy. And at every one of those junctures, you have the potential for anybody that doesn't comport with the sort of dogmas or dispositions or vibe of the field, they get shunted out, they get pushed out, either through failing, like their applications are not accepted, or they get discouraged, or it's possible that they change and they shift their attitudes and dispositions. They're convinced to comply with the majority. Now, philosophers should be extremely worried about this, about whether or not they're effectively inducting people into thinking the way that they do, because unlike the sciences, philosophy is supposed to be more open-ended and flexible. And if they're dogmatically inducting students into the methods and metaphilosophies that they happen to employ, they're doing those students a disservice, and it's not going to yield good long-term outcomes for philosophy. And this is quite a bit different than the sciences, where it's like, look, here's the project we're all working on. You want to come join us? Now, I'm sure science has its issues too, but philosophy is a lot more vulnerable to this sort of concern. And I think philosophers are insufficiently concerned with it. Note, by the way, that this is a concern that psychologists would be equipped to handle. So philosophy and psychology should be working much more closely with one another than they are. Hey, Sapir, what's up? I'm about to wrap it up. Got maybe a couple minutes left in me.
But one of the things that I found like most interesting about it was, and this is something I think anti-realists can get behind, you know, there shouldn't really be a division between realists and anti-realists, which is that a lot of moral disagreement is not really moral disagreement. It's just empirical disagreement. Like we disagree about descriptive facts about the world. And that's what causes a lot of apparent moral disagreement. Like if we thought that if we don't sacrifice a person, you know, the sun will go out, you know, like then, because that's not a moral belief. That's just a belief about how the world works. And it's like, okay, well, if we don't sacrifice someone, the sun will burn out, you know, and like everyone will die. The whole world will be like cast into darkness. And also the person who we sacrifice gets a better afterlife. You know, they get like they'll be better off. It's almost like we're doing them a favor, really. But it's like, if you had those two beliefs, you know,
I get to be sacrificed.
Yeah, you'll just wait, you'll be better off. But like, if you really held those two descriptive, non-moral beliefs, then yeah, you would probably come to the same conclusion, because we make a similar calculation in our present day society where we do sacrifice people for the good of others. You know, people volunteer to sacrifice themselves like for the good of others, at least. And like, you can point out, oh, their beliefs are not totally accurate. You know, like people who die in, you know, Iraq or something are not actually defending like free speech or something like that, like in the United States. Okay, but given those empirical beliefs, like some people are willingly sacrificing themselves for the good of others. And like, so we make the same exact moral calculation that the Aztecs were making, you know, but we just have like different factual beliefs. You know, it's a purely descriptive disagreement.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, he's just right about this. It probably, a lot of it is differences in non-moral beliefs. All right, I'm going to wrap it up there. Thanks everybody for being here. Do like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Check out the description. I've got a lot of links in there, ways you could support me, ways you could find my work elsewhere. I mentioned Substack earlier, so you could check that out. I've got a Discord community that you could go join. So go check that out if that's something that you might be interested in. So just check out the links. You could also just go to the link tree that's in the description, and that'll take you to all the other links, including looping you back to the YouTube channel. Also, go do check out the Emerson channel. Emerson Green has just it's a good channel. It's lots of stuff to disagree with, which I like. And he brings good guests on there to talk to. Not that often, but Huemer's a good guest to have on. So go over there. If you do leave a comment, and I encourage you to leave a comment and engage with the video, even if it's an older video like this, it's always good to get them. I don't know if it bumps them back in the algorithm or what, if new people comment, but if you do leave a comment, always try to be polite. We don't want to contribute to online toxicity and nasty attitudes. And, look, I get critical of realism. Sometimes I get a little fiery here, but we don't want to contribute to a community of people being rude or obnoxious towards people with different views. I don't like people to talk to me that way, and I don't want to encourage you to do that either. And this is something I've started to say when I encourage people to comment on other videos. I do want to see these conversations happen. But I want realists and anti-realists to get along. I want rationalists and empiricists to get along. I want philosophers to get along with one another, unless somebody's like truly awful and odious, and then they fall outside the scope of that. But that's pretty rare. It's not something to generally worry about. And there's going to be, I saw that there's going to be a debate pretty soon, I think on the 7th, with Benjamin Watkins and Darwin something or other. It was over on Twitter. So there's going to be it's probably a live debate on moral realism. And I think they're actually both, yeah, they're both moral realists. And it's going to be like a secular perspective on moral realism versus a theistic perspective on moral realism. If someone finds a thread or a link to that, post it in the comments and I could pin it so that people can find that discussion. So that's going to be interesting because it's realist versus realist. All right. With that, I'm going to close things out. I will see you all another time. And it looks like I only got 19 minutes into the video. So this is going to be like 6 or 7 parts. Oh, another interesting thing. I've seen that Mike Huemer is reposting these over on Twitter with no comments or anything. He's just posting them. So I don't know if he's listening or watching to this, but hey, Huemer, if you are, what's up? I'm glad. Thank you for reposting them. I hope you're taking my criticisms, even when I get a little grumpy or angry, in the spirit of me trying to do philosophy the best that I can. I'm sure everybody makes mistakes here, and maybe you think everything I think is wrong. But I really do. I appreciated the conversation that we had. I think it was a good conversation. And I'd avoided having a conversation for a year or two because I was like, I don't think this is going to be a productive conversation. I don't see how we're going to talk to one another because my methodology to doing philosophy is so radically different. But I thought it worked out fine. And so generally speaking, I'd be happy to talk to moral realists. If there's more out there, if you know of them, you could leave a comment about that in the chat. This is to everybody. I'm not talking to Huemer anymore. Leave a comment. You could always email me. You could always message me in Discord. So there's lots of ways to get in touch with me. I shouldn't be hard to get in touch with. So if you think there's somebody that I should have a discussion with, I'd do a debate. I don't really like debates, but I'll do them. Whatever. I'll do a debate. I don't care. So debates, discussions, interviews, conversations. If someone wants to interview me or grill me, like if they want to come on the channel and just question me the whole time, that'd be fun. Like put me in a hot seat. Aaron Rabinowitz kind of did that a bit when we had a discussion. So wait, is that on my channel or is that on his podcast? I don't remember. Whatever. It doesn't matter. Who cares? Anyway, I'm just up for discussions on meta ethics. I don't seem to get tired of them. So yeah, do all the stuff. Like, subscribe, share, do all that stuff. And good night, everybody.